Dear Vedanta family, it is wonderful to come together and work for a higher cause. As you know, we are having a talk series in Bangalore on Science of Success, Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 3 by Mrs. Jaya Rao. Jayaji will delve into the 6 C's crucial for success. At the end of today's session, we will share the first C with you on the WhatsApp community. Forward this inspiring message to your contacts and WhatsApp groups. Share it on your status and social media. Let's take this message to every corner of Bangalore. If you're not a part of the community yet, click the link in the description box to join. I now request Jayaji to continue with Chapter 2.
ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
After experiencing that sort of emotion,
Sorry, I can't hear. After
experiencing the effect of karma yoga, that is certain amount of calm mind. I think in the last 2 weeks I've been experiencing that. What is the downfall of the karma yoga, not doing the karma yoga, and what are the upward side where I need to take care?
where you can?
Where I need to take care, I don't get into that egoistic zone.
See, the question is, he has felt the benefit of karma yoga, and now he's afraid that if he stops doing karma yoga, what will happen to him? And how does he inspire himself back onto karma yoga, right? If you examine, once you get the taste of the higher, once you have a higher ideal, once you're working for a collective good, why will you go back to selfishness? You won't go back to selfishness. And even if you go, it will be temporary and you'll lift yourself back again. It's like laziness. Let's say this Christmas, New Year's Eve, all of this, the Diwali, all this comes and you are indulgent for a while. You yourself get sick of it. You want to get back to the routine of exercise and work and all of that. So you'll come back. So in other words, you always go back to your original nature. Whatever your nature is, you go back to it. If you have strained yourself to and lifted yourself beyond your capacity, then you will fall. You'll fall back to your level. And that has to be, because that's your level. From that, you have to keep steadily lifting yourself up. But once you get inspired with a higher ideal and you have tasted the joy of unselfishness, you won't go back. And the benefits that accrue from it, you're not dependent on them. So even if they don't come, you're fine. Karma yoga is where you work without depending on the fruit. So if it comes, you're happy. If it doesn't come, you know you have to keep toiling. You have to keep working. And you find the satisfaction in the work itself. Like a cricketer or a tennis player, who wants to come up to national level or international level. He keeps trying and he fails. You've seen your own nephew, how much he struggled to get to under 19 team itself. Now, had he continued, he might have got it. Some people give up, some people keep at it. Like Andy Murray, how many years he played tennis before he won the Wimbledon? And he won the Wimbledon only once, I think. So, whatever be your level, you've got to keep struggling, working, and you find satisfaction in that. You take a look at all the successes, how much they've worked at. Nelson Mandela was in prison for something like 38 years. Like half of Nelson Mandela's life was a write-off. 38 years or 32 years, whatever it is not a small amount. But he came out of it and he became the president of South Africa. Abraham Lincoln, how many setbacks he had. Even the Indian independence movement started in 1857 and we actually got independence in 1947, 90 years. So a whole generation went past. So success is not guaranteed. But once you get the taste, it's like a tiger tastes blood. He'll never go back to anything else. It's so exhilarating, it's so joyful. Why will you go back to selfishness? It's just boring. Any other question? Okay. Now we are beginning with the portion on Sthita Prajna, verses 54 to 72 of chapter 2. Although it is part of chapter 2, it has a special significance because these 19 verses deal with Sthita Prajna. What is that state of perfection? This is the first question that Arjuna asks in the Bhagavad Gita, and therefore it is very significant because the moment you ask questions, it means your intellect is alert, alive, and you're ready to take in knowledge. If you don't ask questions, then it means you're dull, intellect is dull. So, and the first question he asks is, what is the state of perfection? And that balanced 18 verses are a masterly picture of perfection that he draws for all of us. And what is unique to this is, it not only gives the goal, that state of perfection, but also the path to that, so that we can follow the path and get to perfection ourselves. But before that, let's take a look at the paradox in life, in our country particularly. India is supposed to be a spiritual country, right? So all over the world, India is viewed as spiritual. Yet, we have all kinds of ills in society. We have corruption, we have divorces going up, we have disharmony in society. All this thing is happening and it's rising. So the question arises, why these two? How can the two coexist? No discipline, no consideration for others. And yet, on the other hand, every day, every nook and corner of India, there is some spiritual, religious activity going on. People get together for bhajans, people get together for havan, people get together for all kinds of activities. Why? How come the two? This is because there is a basic misunderstanding about the Bhagavad Gita. The basic misunderstanding is that, oh, this is meant for the Himalayas. This is meant for retired people. This is meant for the old as a preparation for death. It is meant for people who are ready to give up their wealth, their families, their jobs, and retire. So no one is really interested. So look here, we've had this class for so long. 2 weeks we didn't have the class, the attendance goes down. The whole of Mumbai city, do you mean there aren't enough people interested? Why is it so? And among them, why is it that the young are so rare to find? It's because of this misunderstanding. And very few of us understand the role of the Bhagavad Gita in life is very central. It's not peripheral. It's not like if you don't have interest in classical music, you can still live in life. If you don't have interest in art, it's okay, you can carry on in life. But the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita is not like that. It's not peripheral to life. It is central. And if you don't have it, you're going to suffer. And all of us are suffering because of that. So the role of the Bhagavad Gita is like salt in food. You could have the best cuisine, you can have the best chef, you can have the best ingredients, but if that food doesn't have salt, you can't eat it. How many of us would be able to eat? It's tasteless. Not just that, sodium from salt is a very important component in our blood. Do you know that? That if your sodium levels go down below a certain level, you die. I've actually seen people faint because the sodium levels are not up to the mark. Next, challenges. The world, the nature of the world itself is challenges. Just as the nature of the ocean is that it must have waves. Right? Do you know an ocean anywhere in the world without waves? Similarly, life means challenges. And if you don't know the art of braving the challenges, of meeting with the challenges and overcoming them, then you can't enjoy life. It's like if you go to the ocean, not in India so much, but in other countries, like one of the countries is in South Africa. There are huge waves. And then there are people who go to surf the waves. So if you don't know how to surf the waves, like us in India, we don't know. We go there, you see that huge wave coming at us, you will faint. But a person who has learned and mastered the art, he surfs the waves so beautifully, so artistically, that you admire it from a distance. So what he does is, if a small wave comes, he rides over it. And if a big wave comes, he goes under it. But he is never caught off balance. He never falls into the water. He's always on his feet. This is the equivalent of learning the Bhagavad Gita. When you learn the Bhagavad Gita, not just book knowledge, but you assimilate it into your system, you live this knowledge, you are a master at meeting with any challenge and overcoming it. Joyfully, happily, without getting perturbed. Today, what is our state? Every little thing disturbs us. If somebody doesn't like your post, you get depressed. What kind of a life is this? You invite somebody over, they don't come, you get upset. Little things, petty, insignificant things affect you. So what you must ask yourself is, I am a human being. And how can I be so weak and helpless and totally dependent on every little thing that fluctuates in the world? You must have the strength. Next comes enjoyment. Yeah.
It is very evident.
1 minute.
Like you said, it is very evident that everything is changing. There's happiness, there's sorrow. I observe it. But there's something in me that still is very uncomfortable towards change. And every time it's looking for stability. So why is it?
Yes, it's true that her question is that in spite of knowing that the pairs of opposites exist, we still want only happiness. We don't want these fluctuations, and that makes us uncomfortable. So, why is it so? This is your question, right? This is because we haven't assimilated the knowledge. We are not living the knowledge, we know it. Intellectually, we know it, we can repeat it, we can teach others, but we haven't assimilated. So, we don't know how to meet with the challenges of life, how to face sorrow, how to face uncomfortable situations. We don't know, we are very fragile. If somebody over the phone says something, if somebody is a little firm in talking to us, then we get into agitation, and that lasts for 5-6 days. So, this is our condition. What must we do? Learn more of the Gita, do more reflection, manana, look within. See, the tendency is to learn the Bhagavad Gita and say, my mother-in-law fits into this category. My colleague is like that. So we use it we still extroverted. Anything we learn, we should first look within and say, this is my condition, how do I overcome it? And then you'll get it. But also, it doesn't come immediately. You have to struggle. For so many years, so many janmas, you have lived this way. You can't expect to change immediately. But consistent effort, genuine effort, honest effort, and sincerity and commitment to your own development, that works. So don't lose hope. Yes, you are like this, fragile. But there will be a time when you will be strong. And you should look around you and see how others react. Look at both positive and negative examples. Look at people who are worse than you and see how they suffer. Look at people who are better than you and see how happy they are. Then you'll get that inspiration to continue. Enjoyment. We believe that the Bhagavad Gita takes away our enjoyment. The truth is that the Gita gives you back the enjoyment that you already have lost. How many of us enjoy a cup of tea? Or coffee? When was the last time you sat and really relished it? What are we doing? We're sipping and we're planning, programming, maneuvering, manipulating. What am I going to do? How am I going to fix this guy? How am I going to get the better of some other person? So even a cup of tea or coffee you don't enjoy. Then you may go on a vacation and your mind is worried about what is happening back here. So all that money and time that you have spent on that vacation is a complete waste, because you might as well have been here. So enjoyment is not that easy. Even that is a technique that you need to learn. And you believe that more is more. The more you indulge, the more you have, the more you will enjoy. Completely wrong. More, in fact, is less. The more you indulge, the less you enjoy. And this is the problem with all affluent people. See, in the world, there are two categories, the haves and the have-nots. The haves have so much and indulge so unintelligently that they have lost their enjoyment. If you're going and eating at exotic food every 2 days, are you going to enjoy it? I've heard people say, oh, I'm sick of Thai food. I've had too much of Chinese food. When do you enjoy? Someone asked me the other day, when you were a kid, how often did you go out and eat? And I thought and said, I don't even remember. Maybe once in 2-3 months. And most of the time we had home food. Now, home food did not mean Mexican food. Home food meant your kind of food. If you were a Gujarati, you had only Gujarati food. If you were a South Indian, you had only South Indian food. Not like now, one day this, one day that, No variety. But we enjoyed life. So, I'm not saying you should not have all of that. But there must be what we call as what the Bhagavad Gita recommends is regulated contact, where the intellect decides how much to have, how often to have, when to have. See, if every day is like a party, then what do you do when there's really a party? You get it? Every day you have exotic food. Then what different do you have when it's your birthday? Or a wedding anniversary or whatever it is? Then success. The Bhagavad Gita gives the formula for success that is not given anywhere else in the world. And it's so simple, but we find it so difficult to implement it because we've lived a certain life. So, what makes for success is not the action per se, but the motivation behind it, the intention behind it. If you have the intention is pure, my God, it's magical. It completely blows people. How can you perform such perfect action? But what we do is routine, mechanical action where there is no participation of either the mind or the intellect. It's just routine physical actions. You go through the routine. That is not what makes for perfect action. And your positions are very fancy. CEO, CFO, this, that. But what is the quality of work that you're doing? Clerical. What is the use of having a CEO who functions like a clerk? You must have clerks who work with the motivation of a chairman. That is what the Bhagavad Gita teaches us. Then comes relationships. Every one of us has conflict and friction in every relationship. Is that not true? Even friends. You meet a friend more often than a certain number of times and you start seeing faults in the person. You start getting irritated with one or two little things. You see how it happens. Then you withdraw. Or the people that you really love, truly love, there also you have problems because there is attachment. Attachment means selfish love, self-love. So the Bhagavad Gita gives you the technique of having wonderful relationships where there are no expectations of the other person. You don't make demands on people. You accept people as they are, you love them for what they are, and you have a great time with in every relationship. It's so fulfilling. Clarity of thought. Where were we? Yesterday we went somewhere and the person was talking non-stop. Picked one idea, jumped to the next, jumped to the third, jumped to the fourth. There is no method in the madness, no clarity. You understand clarity? See, someone conducted an experiment. Not experiment, they had a job interview. And a panel of people were sitting there asking questions of people that they wanted at a very senior level. Very simple question they asked. Question was, what is 2 plus 2? So the lawyer said, Patna High Court said this, Madras High Court said that, Delhi High Court said something else. And in the end, he confused the interviewers so much that they forgot that what 2 plus 2 was. Then they called a scientist. And he went on into atoms and valency and this, that and the other. Again, further confused the interviewers. The third guy was a CA. Clever guy. He went up to the chief person, interviewer, and whispered in his ear, what do you want it to be? So, it's like that. Simple question somebody asks you, you're not able to answer because there's no clarity at all. And if you don't have clarity, how can you live life? You must know clearly who you are, why you've come into the world, what is it that you want to achieve in the world, what do you want to, what is your goal in life, what do you want to do before you die? Nobody knows anything. You're just living. And therefore, we lead miserable lives. We put in a lot of effort. We don't get the requisite returns. We don't even know what we want in life. And then when we are 1 foot in the grave, we realize, this is what I wanted and I did something else. So, every experience, you have the choice of operating with just the body. Means you do routine, repetitive actions. So it's like a bull, who's tied around a thing. He just goes round and round and round the whole day. We are no different from that. So, or we can operate with the mind and have a powerful emotional motivation. Do things because you love someone. Do things because you love what you're doing. They have been showing Zakir Hussein's videos. In one video, he said, you must love the tabla so much that the tabla then cooperates with you. Tabla also loves you. So it's a reciprocal arrangement. Ustad Bismillah Khan said, the Shehnai was his begum, his wife. He loved the Shehnai so much. So, whatever you do, you must have love for it. A chef must love cooking. A carpenter must love carpentry. You and I must love what we're doing. Imagine if I were to come to this class and half an hour before that I say, oh God, I have class today. What would be the quality of the class? This is what tuition teachers do. Open page 56. The expression on the tuition teacher's face only says it all. So how can you expect the children to have any motivation? So that love must be there. Or intellectual ideal. You must be convinced. There's a friend of ours who's a vegan and who's very committed to the environment, everything he does, he weighs against the environment. Like, what is his carbon footprint if he takes a flight from San Francisco to Los Angeles? He's in the US. Then he calculates, no, that's too much. So I will drive from San Francisco to Los Angeles. That's not a small journey, it's at least 6 hours. Perhaps more if you take a break. But he drives. And what kind of car does he drive? He can afford a fancy, luxurious car, but he says, no, that I will be consuming, I'll pollute the environment. So he has a Prius, which is a hybrid car, a small car. So that commitment, intellectual commitment must be there that what I'm doing is the right thing. And the last is spiritual motivation. Anybody who has this spiritual motivation just smashes through all obstacles and boundaries. And that is why it is so important that every person has that spiritual connect. You take a look at the extraordinary people in the world, they have had a spiritual connect. Whether it is Eric Liddell, who was in athletics, he won the 400 meter gold in the 1924 Olympics. What a man. Or whether it was Mirabai, who sang, composed music. Or it was Zakir Hussain, who spoke about Shiva, who spoke about, worship through the tabla. You can't get to that level of excellence unless you have something spiritual about it. And this is what the Bhagavad Gita speaks of. So, let's get into that spirit, especially for these 19 verses, and see what a difference it makes. Take for instance, you're going to some place that is far off. In the car, what are you going to do? You can sit there calling people. You can sit there getting bored. You can listen to uplifting music. Or you can sit there and say, I am Atman. I am not body. I am not mind. I am not intellect. And actually observe what is the state of your mind when you arrive at that meeting. You're going for a meeting. You can sit in the car going through, okay, what am I going to discuss? What am I going to say? How will I present this? All that preparation you can do. Or you can just sit listening to uplifting music. A bhajan that talks about Ram or Krishna or anything. Or you just contemplate and say, I am Atman. I am not the body. I am not the mind. I am not the intellect. And see the difference. See, it's only when you put it into practice that you understand the difference. Otherwise, you're not going to. And however mechanical it may be, you may not say, I am Atman through experience, or you may not get into the spirit of it. But just say it, and it won't last. You'll say it 5 times, the 6th time you'll go somewhere else. But even those 5 times has power. This is the power of the spirit. This is why we were born as Indians. We don't belong to the mall culture. Never in our history have we gone out and conquered other nations. We have not indulged in economic bullying, political clout, or military prowess. We have never used it against any other nation. And yet, we were a powerful country. We were a rich country. But yes, We conquered the whole world with the message of Vedanta. The whole world at that time, China, Japan, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand. In Thailand, they believe that Ram is theirs. They have a place called Ayodhya. You know that, right? And they refuse to believe that Rama was Indian. This is the influence that our culture has had on others. China had joint family system from us. So we have to get back to that, to the roots, and tell ourselves that this is my original nature. This is what I'm worth. And shake off the slavery that the British made us think. Shake off the past tortures that came to us through the Mughals or whatever, and go back to the origin. We still have that inferiority complex. It shows in everything. An Indian may be the CEO of a multinational, but that inferiority complex is still there. Which is why, in spite of in the United States, we have more than 1 million affluent Indians. Most of the Indians in the US are affluent. But political influence, nothing. Why? Because we still have that slavish mentality. That we need to shake off. And it's not difficult. Shake it off like a dog shakes off water. How does the dog shake off water? It just gives itself a nice shake. So give yourself that wake-up call and say, I am going to do what? Get to that state of Sthita Prajna. So let's begin with Arjuna's question, verse 54.
अर्जुन उवाच स्थितप्रज्ञस्य का भाषा समाधिस्थस्य केशव स्थितधि किं प्रभाषेत किमासीत व्रजेत किम्.
Arjuna says, O Keshava, what is the definition of a Sthita Prajna, one established in wisdom, absorbed in samadhi, meditation? How does one rooted in wisdom speak, sit, walk? So if you look at this question closely, you'll see that there are 4 questions he's asking. 4 questions in this one question. Sthita prajnasya ka bhasha means what is the description of a man of perfection? What is the definition of perfection? Then how does he speak? Means he's not asking whether he's speaking Gujarati or Tamil or Kannada. What is he asking? He's asking how does his inner personality speak? Means it's an organ, speech is an organ of action. So how does the infinite, he has reached that state of infinity, how does the infinite express through finite? Difficult, no? See, you must appreciate the difficulty because we find it difficult. You're educated. How can you communicate to an illiterate person? Basic hygiene. Like the other day, there's a maid in the home who spat where she should not be spitting. She just didn't understand. She said, what did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. Because to her, spitting is common. If you get bored, you just spit. This is the way they think. I said, you're not supposed to spit. How do you communicate that? You understand? How do you communicate to a child certain things that you must study? The child doesn't understand. Why should I study? I don't like it. I don't like going to school. Why should I go? How are you going to tell the child? Convince the child, motivate the child. And yet, here is Krishna who does a masterly job. What is he trying to communicate? He is trying to communicate the infinite that cannot be expressed. Then next question, how does he sit? The question is not does he sit in Padmasana or does he sit on a chair or, What he means by sitting is when you sit, you're not contacting the world. So the question is what's happening inside him? What makes him tick? Third question, how does he walk? Means how does he interact with the world? So the problem is at that state of enlightenment, the fourth plane of consciousness, we have no access to it. And so we look at externals. So one person says, my guru is the best because he wakes up at 3 a.m. He must be having insomnia. Can't sleep. Another person says, he is celibate, therefore he is the greatest. So maybe nobody is willing to marry him, that's why he is celibate. Third person says, he eats very little food, maybe he's got a stomach problem. So we go by, what I'm saying is, we go by externals which have nothing to do with his original state. And then we look at people who are supposed to be, who are reputed to be enlightened. And they are also different. Like Sudama was a pauper. Krishna was a king living in opulence. Rama vowed, even though he was allowed multiple wives as a king, he vowed that he would be true only to one wife. Krishna had 16,000 wives. Buddha was born a prince, heir to the throne. He walked away and lived a life of penance. Janaka was a king. He lived in the lap of luxury. So this confuses us. So which one should I follow? So a guy will say, should I be true to one wife or have multiple wives? Should I be rich or should I give up and live a life of denial? Arjuna wants a reliable definition that he can go by, and he can't think of a better person than Krishna to give that, because Krishna was not only enlightened, he was enlightened at birth. He was supposed to be an avatar of Lord Vishnu and his dear friend. And so he's got a great opportunity to ask. Now, Krishna starts the answer with verse 55.
श्रीभगवानुवाच प्रजहाति यदा कामान् सर्वान् पार्थमनोगतान् आत्मन्येवात्मना तुष्टः स्थितप्रज्ञस्तदोच्यते.
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Krishna speaks and he says, O Partha, son of Pritha. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, both Krishna and Arjuna use endearing terms to address each other, which underlines the immense affection and love they had for each other. And we keep repeating this, that knowledge can be transacted, knowledge is easily conveyed in an environment of affection. Even in school, you find children who adore their math teacher, who love their teacher, who have a connect with the teacher. They do well in that subject. They start liking the subject. If they have a teacher that they don't connect with, who's nasty to them, and they don't like, they start disliking the subject itself. So it's very important to have this background of affection in any field that you're working in. Basic consideration, you should be light-hearted, enjoy working together. Then a lot of work gets done. So, O Partha, when all desires of the mind are totally abandoned and one is fulfilled in the self alone, by the self, then one is said to be a Sthita Prajna, established in wisdom. So, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, he uses various compositions, various configurations, like yada tada means when you do this, then you're supposed to be like, you're considered Sthita Prajna. Yaha, yada tada, yada when and then. So it's a scientific treatise. It's not just an opinion of someone. And yaha means whoever you are. You are not asked, are you a Hindu, are you a man, woman, your caste, your gotra, nothing. As long as you're a human being, if you follow this, this will be the result. Highly scientific and universal, the message. So, verse 55 to 59, he defines who a perfect person is, Sthita Prajna. Then in verse 60, he says, the senses of even a constantly striving wise person powerfully drag the mind away. Now, take a look at us. We are not constantly striving and we are certainly not wise. And yet, we take the senses so lightly. Now, New Year has just gone by. You must have taken its New Year resolutions. But by the time, today we are on the 8th, right? By the time you are on the 8th of January, you've already violated resolutions. So it's not that easy. Then what should follow after that is that mind takes the intellect away because he is going step by step. The outermost component is the body, then the mind, then the intellect, then you. But he goes off at a tangent, as it were, and 6 verses, 61 to 66, he devotes to explaining the importance of the intellect. Why? Because we don't know. We don't know, many of us don't even know that we have an intellect, that there is such a thing as intellect. And those of us who know are not trying to develop that intellect. We don't even use whatever little intellect we have. And we don't understand the importance of the intellect in life. So he hammers it in. And then in verse 67, he says, that mind that was dragged by the senses in verse 60 now takes away the intellect. And he has already said, buddhi nashat pranashyati. Without the buddhi, you're gone. You're destroyed. The conclusion in 68 is, therefore, where do you begin the spiritual journey? Restrain the senses. This is a point that most of us don't look at. In our sense contact, is it the intellect that is guiding us, or are we just doing it because we have a desire for it or a weakness for it? And the conclusion, verses 69 to 72, is beautiful. It's one of the best portions of this entire Bhagavad Gita. So, let's begin with the definition. Ka bhasha. There are 2 points here. 2 aspects. The negative aspect is abandoned desire. So, when all desires of the mind, sarvan partha manogatan, when you give up all desires from the mind, this is the negative aspect. And very important is the positive aspect. And you are fulfilled in the self by the self. Now this confuses us. Go back to your own life, your own experience. As a child, you were totally besotten by what? Toys. There are children who clutch the toy and go to sleep holding it so tight that the mother has difficulty extricating the toy from your grip. Even when you're fast asleep, you don't let go. That child who is so engrossed in the toys, now as an adult, do you play with toys? The same toys. Are you obsessed with the toys? No. Do you still have desire for the toys? No. They have dropped long back. The question is, did you at any stage take a decision to give up toys? No. Then ask yourself, how did they go? If you know the answer to that, you will now know what to do. How did they go? On your birthday, maybe 6th birthday, I don't know, your parents gifted you with a bicycle. And that bicycle was so thrilling. Just to learn how to balance on that bicycle was so exciting. Even if you fell several times, you got hurt, you still went back to the bicycle because it was so exciting, so thrilling, so enjoyable. What happened to the toys? They dropped. So you did not give up the toys. The toys gave you up. Why? Because you just moved to something that was more fascinating, that gave you more joy. And thus you went from stage to stage. And then as a teenager, you had a crush on someone, you fell in love. Huh? See, I see smiles everywhere because you're going back to your own experience. Then what happened? Everything fell. The bicycle went, the toys went, everything. Because that experience is so thrilling. And thus, now you move beyond that. Then as a young person, your career, your ambitions, your goals, all of that takes over. Then you get married, you have children. This is your escalation from infancy right up to adulthood. Fortunately for us, this is natural, automatic. But now, as physical adults, we are spiritual children, stuck with material and physical enjoyments. So when he says, abandon all desires from the mind, if suppose he had ended with this, it is only half the story. Because he hasn't told you how to overcome desire. The fact is, you can't give up desire. Nobody can give up desire. You can only take up a higher desire. So, when they describe people as men of renunciation, who've given up everything in life, it doesn't motivate us because we don't want to do that. Because he's talking about giving up things that we have value for. No Vedantin worth the name ever said, give up anything. No guru tells you to give up anything. He only exposes you to the higher. And once you get the taste of the higher, you yourself will not indulge in the lower. Get it? So, you have to move from the physical to the emotional, to the intellectual, to the spiritual. See, A child who's obsessed with toys is gifted with a laptop. Then you know what he does? He goes back to his younger sister and says, "You can have it. You can have all my toys." The sister looks up to him with admiration. This guy is a man of renunciation. He's not. He's just moved up to the laptop. Then she also gets the hang of the laptop and they fight for time on the laptop. And then he moves on to higher things and gives it up happily. So this is the progression. Now the problem is that since we have to make that effort to move up, we don't take that. Nobody wants to move up. But you don't realize that you are denying yourself higher enjoyments. Not just that, when you move to the higher, you can retain the lower also. It's not that if you turn spiritual, you can't enjoy an ice cream. You get everything. So, desire is actually a limitation because then it binds you. It restricts you. And all your energies go only towards that object of desire. One object. So it imprisons you. What must you do? Just let go. And if you don't, as long as you don't get the object of desire, you will be agitated. You'll be miserable. So, what must we do? Let go of the desire, not the object. Desire actually is the greatest obstruction, is the obstacle that stands between you and the object of desire. When you're obsessed with something, you never get it. Even if you pretend and just let go, out of frustration you let go of the desire, object comes to you. And you enjoy it. You see, have you observed a person who's got a tremendous desire for eating food, he's a foodie, never enjoys it. Who enjoys? A person who's objective towards food. Who enjoys alcohol? Not an alcoholic. Alcoholic doesn't enjoy. A casual drinker enjoys. That's life. So you must learn the art of even enjoying.